This happened around the beginning of September last year, and it's something that stayed with me far longer than I expected it to. At the time, I didn't realize how deeply it would affect me, but looking back now, it was one of those experiences that quietly changes how you see the place you live. Nothing dramatic happened directly to me, but the sense of unease that settled in afterward never really left. I just want to quietly welcome you to Sleepy Shadows. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax, to slow your thoughts, and gently drift off to sleep. If today felt long or heavy, I hope this story brings you a little comfort. Whenever you feel like it, you can leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I always love knowing how far these shadows travel. And if calm, quiet horror stories like this help you unwind, you're always welcome to subscribe. Now, settle back in, take a slow breath, and let the story continue. I live in a house at the very top of my street. It's a quiet area, the kind of place where you get used to seeing the same people every day. Across from my house, on the other side of the street and next to the main road, there is a large farm. It's been there for as long as I can remember. I grew up seeing those fields every single day. They were just part of the background of my life, something so normal that I never gave them much thought. On this particular day, I was walking home from school like I always did. I entered the street from the bottom entrance and started making my way uphill toward my house. Nothing felt strange at first. It was just another afternoon, and I was probably thinking about homework or what I was going to do when I got home. Then I noticed something that made me stop. Out in the field, I could see a large white tent set up. Behind it were several police cars, parked in a way that immediately told me something serious was going on. The sight was so out of place that my stomach dropped a little. That field was usually empty, quiet, and boring. Seeing police vehicles there felt wrong, like the scenery had been suddenly replaced with something from a crime show. As I kept walking, I noticed a crowd of people gathered near the top of the street. They were standing right near my house, close enough that it felt invasive. Neighbors, people I didn't recognize, and others who had clearly come just to see what was happening, were all standing around, talking quietly and pointing toward the field. I felt a knot of anxiety forming in my chest. When I reached them, I asked what was going on. Someone turned to me and told me, in a matter-of-fact way, that one of the farm workers had found a dead body while harvesting crops in the field. The body had been there for so long that it was just a skeleton. Hearing that made my blood run cold. The way they said it, so casually, like it was just another piece of news, made it even worse. It didn't feel real at first. A skeleton. In the field I looked at every day, or right across from my house. What made it even creepier was the realization that I could see the area where the body was found directly from my bedroom window. That thought hit me hard. My room, the place where I slept every night, where I felt safe, had a clear view of a place where someone had been murdered and left to rot for years without anyone knowing. That idea alone was enough to make my skin crawl. As the day went on, more people gathered. The police presence didn't go away. In fact, it increased. Soon enough, the media showed up. Reporters, cameras, and journalists crowded the area, asking questions and taking photos. At one point, even my family was interviewed by the local paper and local news stations. It all felt surreal. For days, the police stayed there. 3 to 4 days. Maybe more. They analyzed everything. When they dug up the ground around the area where the bones were found, they treated the field like a massive crime scene. Watching them work from my house was unsettling. Every shovel of dirt they lifted felt like a reminder that something horrible had happened right there, unnoticed, for over a decade. Eventually, information started coming out. The bones were linked to a prostitute who had gone missing over 10 years ago. At the time of her disappearance, she was just another missing person case, one of many that had never been solved. Now, suddenly, her remains were found right outside my home. What made it even more disturbing was that her death was believed to be connected to a local serial killer who had targeted prostitutes in the area years ago. That detail changed everything. It wasn't just a random death. It wasn't an accident. It was part of something darker, something deliberate. The idea that a serial killer had once operated in my local area, possibly walking the same streets I walked, was terrifying. At first, the farmer who owned the land was arrested in connection with the murder. That caused even more tension and fear. People whispered about it, speculated, and shared rumors. But eventually, he was cleared of any wrongdoing. He had nothing to do with it. Once that happened, people began leaving flowers at the fence near where the body was found. Bouquets, wreaths, small notes. It became a memorial of sorts. For about a month afterward, people kept coming to pay their respects. And that's when my fear shifted into something deeper. I became obsessed with the idea that serial killers often returned to places where they committed their crimes. I had read about it, seen it in documentaries, and heard people talk about it. The thought wouldn't leave my mind. Every time I saw someone standing by the fence, laying flowers or quietly looking into the field, I wondered who they were. Were they grieving? Or were they something else? I started convincing myself that one of those people might actually be the killer. The idea felt irrational, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I would watch from my window, heart pounding, trying to figure out if anyone looked suspicious. Every unfamiliar face made me uneasy. Every car that slowed down near the field made my stomach twist. I stopped feeling comfortable in my own room. At night, when I looked out the window, the field didn't look the same anymore. It wasn't just a dark, open space. It felt heavy, like it was holding on to something terrible. I imagined the body lying there for years, unseen, unnoticed, while life went on around it. The police eventually left. The media moved on. The flowers slowly stopped appearing. But the feeling didn't go away. Even now, when I think about it, I still feel that same unease. Knowing that something so dark could exist so close to home, hidden in plain sight for so long, changed the way I see my surroundings. It made me realize how little we truly know about the places we think are safe. Nothing else ever happened after that. No arrests, no new discoveries. But for a long time, every time I walked up that street, I couldn't stop thinking about what had been found there. And even now, when I look out my bedroom window, I still remember that white tent, the police cars, and the crowd gathered outside my house, all because of something that had been waiting in that field for over 10 years. My roommate and I were having a really hard time finding a new place to live. Our lease at the old apartment was coming to an end, and we had already stayed a month past the official move-out date. The landlord was starting to get impatient, and so were we. We spent weeks scrolling through listings, calling numbers that never answered, and visiting places that either fell apart in front of us or were far too expensive for what they offered. It felt like every decent place was already taken, and every available one had some major issue. Just when we were starting to panic, we found a house that seemed almost too good to be true. It was a little run down, clearly neglected, but it had incredible potential. The owner was in the process of fixing it up and hadn't planned to rent it out until everything was finished. Once we explained our situation, told them how desperate we were, and after some back and forth, we managed to convince them to let us move in early while repairs were still ongoing. At the time, it felt like a huge win. The house was massive. The rooms were unusually large, with high ceilings and wide doorways. There was a garden out back, a porch, and plenty of space for both of us to feel like we weren't on top of each other. It was also conveniently located, close to both of our jobs, which felt like a miracle after everything we'd been through. Because the place was still in rough shape, we negotiated a much lower rent than similar houses in the area. The owner had already replaced all the major appliances with brand new ones, which made the place feel livable right away. But beyond that, the house was rough. The floors were disgusting, stained and worn down from decades of use. The wallpaper was old, peeling, and dirty. Everything felt grimy, like it hadn't been properly cleaned in years. There was old furniture scattered throughout the house that needed to be hauled out, heavy pieces that looked like they hadn't been moved in decades. Living there felt like stepping into a horror movie set. Still, we told ourselves it was temporary. Once the repairs were finished, the house would be beautiful. We focused on that idea and ignored the uneasy feeling that came with being surrounded by so much decay and neglect. The very first night set the tone. My roommate decided to stay over at his girlfriend's place that night, which left me alone in the house. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was tired from moving and figured I'd just crash early. But from the moment I was alone, something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't a specific fear, like seeing something or hearing a noise. It was just a constant awareness, like eyes on me even when I was standing still. Every so often, chills would ripple through my body for no clear reason. I tried to distract myself by unpacking a bit, then eventually decided to go to bed. That night, sleep came in fragments. I would drift off for a few minutes, then wake up suddenly, heart racing, not knowing why, over and over again. Even though it was the middle of winter, I felt unbearably hot. I was sweating. My skin felt itchy and irritated, and there was a strange sensation like tiny pinches all over my body. No matter how I shifted or adjusted the blankets, I couldn't get comfortable. All night long, I had the same dream. In it, there was an old woman wearing a white nightgown. She stood at a distance at first, just watching me. Her face wasn't angry or kind. It was blank, almost tired. As the night went on, she got closer. Every time I fell back asleep, she was nearer than before, standing at the foot of the bed, then beside it. Eventually, I woke up suddenly because it felt like someone had grabbed my ankles. I shot upright in bed, breathing hard, completely convinced for a split second that someone was actually there. But the room was empty, silent. The next morning, I tried to brush it off as stress. We had just moved. I was tired. The house was unfamiliar. That explanation made sense, at least on the surface. Later that day, our next-door neighbors came by to introduce themselves. When they were an older couple who had lived in their home for about 60 years. They were friendly and talkative, and after exchanging pleasantries, they started telling us about the history of our house. That conversation made my stomach sink. The woman who lived there before us was a distant relative of the new owner. She had lived in that house almost her entire life. In fact, the house had been in her family since it was built, close to 100 years ago. For the last 10 years of her life, she lived there with a private nurse. According to the neighbors, the nurse took horrible care of the house. Worse than that, she treated the woman badly. They didn't go into graphic detail, but it was clear the situation wasn't good. The house fell into disrepair, and the woman's final years were lonely and neglected. She died in the house, and when they said that, my mind immediately went to my bedroom. There was a massive old bed still sitting in there when we moved in, far larger than anything either of us owned. I couldn't help but assume that was where she died. After that, strange things continued to happen. For the next month or so, my roommate and I both experienced the same odd situations. We would hear the other wake up early in the morning, making noise in the kitchen, eating breakfast or cleaning. One of us would get up, expecting to see the other already awake, only to find them still asleep in bed. I would come home frequently to find my back door unlocked. That door opened onto the patio, and I was certain I had locked it when I left. Random items would go missing, and then reappear in places we didn't remember putting them. At night, I often heard footsteps on the porch, slow pacing back and forth, like someone walking just outside. Whenever I checked, there was nothing there. None of it felt violent or threatening, just unsettling. Like the house was aware of us, watching, reacting. Eventually, the renovations were finished. The floors were replaced, the wallpaper torn down, the furniture removed. The house transformed completely. It became bright, clean, and warm, almost unrecognizable from what it had been before. And just like that, everything stopped. The strange noises, the misplaced items, the feeling of being watched. It all disappeared. Now, the house feels alive in a different way. Comfortable, peaceful. Sometimes I like to believe that whatever was watching us before isn't gone, just changed. That it's no longer trapped in neglect and decay, and now simply watches over the place instead. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. All I know is that once the house was cared for again, the darkness left with it. I was living at my grandmother's house during a strange period of transition in my family's life. She had recently gone into a nursing home, and my dad had taken over the house. It wasn't new to us, of course. I had spent a lot of time there growing up, visiting often, staying over, and being familiar with every room, every creak in the floor, every shadow cast by the lamps at night. Even so, once she was gone and the house changed hands, it didn't feel the same anymore. My grandmother had been extremely religious. Church wasn't just something she attended on Sundays, it was the center of her life. She prayed constantly, had religious items all over the house, and believed deeply in spiritual warfare, good and evil, and the presence of forces most people don't like to think about. Growing up, I heard a lot of strange stories from her, but one in particular always stuck with me. She used to tell us about a time years earlier when she believed her neighbor was possessed. According to her, the man had been acting strangely, and she became convinced something evil had attached itself to him. She claimed she had tried to perform an exorcism on him herself. Whether that story was true or not, I don't know, but she believed it with her whole heart. As a kid, I never knew what to think about it. As an adult living in that house, the memory of that story felt heavier. The layout of the house is important to understand what happened later. The dining room and the living room are essentially the same large space, just divided by furniture. From there, the room opens directly into the kitchen, and beyond the kitchen is a small computer room. There are no doors separating these spaces, just open walkways, which means sound travels very easily throughout the house. One evening, in 2010, a group of my friends and I were hanging out at the dining room table. It wasn't anything unusual. We were just relaxing, talking, laughing, and listening to music on the computer in the other room. I had a massive music library on that computer, something like 16 gigs worth of music. We'd put it on shuffle and let it play in the background while we talked. We'd been sitting there for a long time, and at some point, without anyone realizing it, the music stopped. None of us noticed right away. We were in the middle of joking around and talking, and it wasn't until there was a brief pause in the conversation that the silence became noticeable. Someone commented on how quiet it suddenly was, and asked why the music had stopped. That alone was a little strange. No one had gone into the computer room. No one had touched the mouse or keyboard. We were all sitting at the table the entire time. Still, we figured maybe the playlist had ended or the computer had gone to sleep. It didn't seem that alarming at first. Then we heard something. At first, it was very subtle. Almost quiet enough that you could convince yourself it wasn't real if you weren't paying attention. It sounded like footsteps. Not just any footsteps, but the distinct clicking sound of high heels walking on a hard surface. The sound echoed slightly, like someone walking down a narrow alleyway. The sound was coming from the computer speakers. We all looked at each other. Nobody laughed. Nobody joked. The room went dead silent except for the sound of those footsteps. Slowly, carefully, we got up and walked towards the computer room together. None of us wanted to be the one to go alone. When we got there, the computer screen was on its screensaver. That meant no one had touched it. The footsteps continued, steady and rhythmic. Click, click, click. As we stood there staring at the screen, the sound began to pick up speed. The walking turned into something faster, more frantic, like the person was running now. Then, suddenly, a woman screamed. It wasn't a small scream. It wasn't a startled noise or a shout. It was a full, blood-curdling scream, the kind that makes your chest tighten and your stomach drop instantly. It came through the speakers loud and clear, echoing through the open rooms of the house. Every one of us jumped. Just as the scream ended, something even stranger happened. The Ghostbusters theme song started playing. Loud, cheerful, completely out of place. The contrast was so jarring that for a moment, none of us even knew how to react. We just stood there, frozen, staring at the computer, trying to understand what we were hearing. It felt almost mocking, like a punchline delivered by something that knew exactly how absurd and terrifying the moment had just been. One of us quickly moved the mouse to see where the sound was coming from. There were no internet tabs open, no browser running. The only program open was iTunes, and it was paused. There was nothing on the desktop that could explain it. No media player, no video file, nothing. And I knew for a fact that I did not have the Ghostbusters theme song downloaded on that computer. I never had. It was as if the sound had come from nowhere. Standing there in that moment, the thought crossed all of our minds at the same time, even if none of us said it out loud right away. If there really was something in that house, something strange or unexplained, it felt like it was deliberately messing with us. Almost like it was reacting to us noticing it, like it was taunting us for daring to question what was happening. That wasn't the only strange thing that ever happened in that house. There were constant issues with electronics, things that never made sense. One night, during a power outage, an alarm clock went off around 2 or 3 in the morning. The power was completely out. There was no electricity. Yet the alarm went off anyway, loud enough to wake people up. Lights would flicker. Devices would turn on or off without explanation. Sounds would come from rooms no one was in. It wasn't just one big dramatic event. It was lots of small, unsettling things that added up over time. The kind of stuff that makes you feel uneasy even when nothing obvious is happening. The kind of stuff that makes you feel like the house itself is aware of you. Living there felt heavy. Between my grandmother's stories, the history of the house, and the constant electronic disturbances, it always felt like something was off. Like the house had layers of memories and energy that never fully went away, even after she left. I don't know what caused those things. I don't know if there was ever anything supernatural going on, or if there's a logical explanation for everything that happened. All I know is that house was creepy, in a way I've never experienced anywhere else. And to this day, whenever I think about that night with the computer, the footsteps, the scream, and the Ghostbusters theme song, I still get chills. It felt like something wanted us to know it was there. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Sleepy Shadows for daily calm horror stories made for late nights and sleep. You can also turn on notifications so you don't miss a new story when the night gets quiet and the shadows return. Now, let's continue. My family moved into an older house when I was about 6 or 7 years old. At the time, I was too young to understand much about the history of a place, or to think deeply about why a house might feel strange. To me, it was just another house, another place we were supposed to live. I didn't know how old it was exactly, but even as a child, I could tell it wasn't new. It had that worn, quiet feeling older houses sometimes have, where the walls seem thicker and the air feels heavier. My brother and I shared a lot of time together back then. We were close in age, and we spent most of our days playing on the floor with our toys, especially our little cars. We would sit for hours, pushing them across the carpet, building imaginary roads, and barely paying attention to anything else going on around us. That's usually when she would appear, or the old woman. The first time it happened, I didn't fully understand what I was seeing. She just appeared in the room with us, as if she had always been there. She was dressed in an ankle-length dress, the kind you might expect to see in old photographs. It had a frilly collar, and there was a brooch pinned at her neck. Her hair was white and pulled tightly into a bun at the back of her head. Everything about her looked old-fashioned, like she didn't belong in the time we were living in. She never spoke. She would stand over us while we were playing, looking down at us with a stern expression. Slowly, she would wag her finger back and forth, the way an adult does when they are scolding a child for misbehaving. The gesture was clear and unmistakable. Even without words, the message felt strong. We were doing something wrong, or at least something she didn't approve of. Then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she would disappear. There was no fading away, no walking out of the room. One moment she was there, and the next, she was gone. The room would feel empty again, and my brother and I would just sit there, unsure of what to say. What made it even stranger was that this didn't happen just once. It happened repeatedly. Not every day, but often enough that it became something we both experienced and remembered. What still unsettles me to this day is that my brother saw her too. This wasn't something I imagined on my own. We both described her the same way, without prompting each other. Same dress, same hair, same finger wagging, same silence. That shared experience made it impossible to dismiss it as just a child's imagination. At night, things were no better. Almost every night, we would hear the sound of people walking through the halls. The footsteps weren't random creaks or settling noises. They sounded deliberate, like someone pacing back and forth, moving from room to room. Sometimes it sounded like more than one person. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening, too afraid to move. There was one night in particular that stands out more than the others. I woke up suddenly and noticed that my bedroom window was glowing with light. That alone was strange, because it was night, and there shouldn't have been any light bright enough to shine through like that. Then I saw it. The shadow of a hand. It wasn't vague or unclear. It was the distinct outline of fingers and a palm, stretched across my entire bedroom window. It looked like someone was standing right outside, pressing their hand against the glass. I remember my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I just stared at it until it slowly disappeared. Other things happened too. I would hear voices whispering my name when no one was there. It was soft, just loud enough to catch my attention, like someone trying to get me to respond. The kitchen had cold spots where the air felt noticeably colder than the rest of the house, no matter the time of year. You could walk into them and feel the temperature drop instantly. There were other strange occurrences that are harder to explain or remember clearly now. But at the time, they added to the constant feeling that the house was wrong. Like it didn't want us there, or like something in it was watching us closely. We only lived in that house for about 3 months. Even as a child, I felt relieved when we moved out. I didn't fully understand why, but I knew I never wanted to go back. The house left a mark on me, one that followed me long after we were gone. During that time, I started having extremely vivid dreams. They weren't just normal nightmares that fade after a while. These were intense, detailed, and frightening in a way that felt very real. The main focus of these dreams was a doll my mom owned. It was a Raggedy Andy-style doll, something she had kept for years. During the day, it was just a doll sitting quietly in the house. In my dreams, it was something else entirely. The doll would stalk me. It would follow me no matter where I tried to run. Sometimes it would appear suddenly, standing in doorways or at the end of hallways. Other times, it would chase me, its stitched smile frozen in place. The worst dreams were the ones where it grabbed me and dragged me away, pulling me somewhere I couldn't escape from. What makes this even harder to understand is how long those nightmares lasted. They didn't stop when we moved out of the house. They didn't fade after a few weeks or months. They continued for years, about 8 years, consistently. I would have the same dreams over and over, sometimes changing slightly, but always centered around that doll. Even now, decades later, the memory of those dreams is vivid. I'm 34 years old now. I've lived in many different places since then. I've grown up, built a life, and put a lot of distance between myself and that house. But some things never fully go away. When I visit my parents' house now, that doll is still there, and I still can't be in the same room with it. There's something about it that makes my skin crawl, something that brings all of those feelings rushing back. The fear, the helplessness, the sense of being watched. I know logically that it's just a doll. I know that I'm an adult now and that I'm safe. But that doesn't change how it makes me feel. Some experiences from childhood sink so deep that they shape you without you realizing it. That house, the old woman, the whispers, the shadows, and those nightmares all became part of me in a way I can't fully explain. And even now, all these years later, I still avoid that doll whenever I can. When I was about 2 years old, my mother bought a Ouija board. At the time, she didn't see it as something dangerous or serious. To her, it was just curiosity, something she thought might be interesting or even harmless. She wasn't deeply spiritual or obsessed with the paranormal, and she didn't believe she was inviting anything dark into her life. She simply thought it was a way to communicate, to explore something unknown. According to my mom, whenever she used the Ouija board, she would always end up speaking to the same spirit. The spirit claimed to be an 8-year-old boy named Henry. At first, she didn't think much of it. She assumed it was her own subconscious or imagination guiding the planchette. But over time, the conversations became more consistent and more disturbing. Henry didn't say kind things. He would tell my mom that he hated me. He told her that I had stolen his place in the world. He claimed that my mother was supposed to be his mother, not mine. According to him, I didn't belong, and he did. These messages were repeated often enough that they stuck with her. Even though she tried to dismiss it, the words stayed with her, leaving her uneasy. About a year after I was born, my mother had a miscarriage. At the time, no one connected the two things. Life moved on, and the Ouija board was eventually put away. My mom stopped using it, telling herself that it was better to leave that curiosity alone. Years passed, and the conversations with Henry became something she rarely talked about, something she tucked away as a strange chapter of her life. 14 years went by. By then, I was a teenager. Plus, I had grown up hearing odd stories about my early childhood, but nothing that fully explained why I always felt different. Around that time, my mother decided to visit a psychic. She didn't believe in psychics at all. In fact, she was skeptical and almost embarrassed about going. But something pushed her to do it, and she couldn't quite explain why. She went without telling me, expecting nothing. What happened there changed how she viewed everything. The psychic began by telling my mother that she was supposed to have 3 children. That alone made her pause. Then the psychic asked her if she had an older teenage son. When my mom said yes, the psychic's tone shifted. She told my mom that there was a vengeful spirit of a child that had been following me for years. Not weeks, not months, years upon years. When the psychic described the spirit as angry and resentful, jealous of my life. My mom was stunned. She hadn't mentioned the Ouija board. She hadn't mentioned Henry. She hadn't talked about the miscarriage. None of that information had been shared. Yet the psychic spoke as if she already knew. For my mother, that was the moment everything clicked together. For me, it explained things I had never been able to put into words. As far back as I can remember, strange things have always been part of my life. Hearing voices wasn't unusual for me. Scratching sounds would come from walls or floors when no one was there. I would hear footsteps moving through rooms even when I was alone. Shadows would move where they shouldn't, slipping past doorways or lingering just long enough for me to notice them. At the time, I thought this was normal. As a child, you don't question your reality the way adults do. You assume everyone experiences the same things. I didn't tell people because I didn't think it was strange. It was just how the world felt to me. One of the most unsettling parts of my childhood was someone I used to talk to. I called him the Black Man. My parents noticed it early on. I would talk to him as if he were real, holding conversations, responding to things no one else could hear. When my parents asked me about him, I described him in detail. I talked about his appearance, his posture, the way he stood and watched. At first, they assumed it was an imaginary friend. But then they realized something disturbing. The description I gave matched exactly how my landlord's husband looked. A man I had never met. A man who had died years before we ever moved into that house. He had passed away while fixing something on the property. I couldn't have known what he looked like, yet I described him accurately enough that my parents were shaken. That was the first time they realized something wasn't right. As I grew older, the strange experiences didn't stop. They just changed. The voices became quieter but more frequent. The shadows became harder to ignore. There was always a sense that something was nearby, watching, waiting. I would feel sudden anger or sadness that didn't belong to me. Emotions would hit me out of nowhere, intense and unexplained. Looking back now, the idea that something had been attached to me for most of my life makes a disturbing kind of sense. The thought that a child's spirit, angry and resentful, I'd believed my life should have been his is something I still struggle to understand. Whether it was Henry or something else entirely, I don't know. All I know is that my experiences line up too closely with what my mother was told to be ignored completely. Even now, I still hear things from time to time. Scratches, footsteps, whispers. I've learned to live with it, to push it into the background of my life. But there are moments when it all comes rushing back. When I remember the Ouija board, the psychic, the miscarriage, and the things I saw and heard as a child. I don't know if I believe everything has a supernatural explanation. But I also can't deny the pattern, the timing, the way certain details overlap too perfectly. Some people will say it's coincidence. Others will say it's imagination. All I know is that these experiences have been with me for as long as I can remember, and they've shaped who I am in ways I'm still trying to understand. A few years ago, I was in the middle of a year-long bicycle tour that took me through several different countries. It was one of those trips that slowly becomes your entire life. Days blurred together, measured more by miles ridden and places slept than by calendars or clocks. I carried everything I owned with me on my bike, including a small travel guitar that I liked to play at night when I stopped for the day. Most nights, I camped wherever I could find a quiet spot. Sometimes it was near the side of a long dirt road deep in the back country. Other times it was in places so remote that I wouldn't see another person all day. I slept in the Amazon in Ecuador, high up in the mountains of Peru, and in countless places in between. You get used to being alone on a trip like that. At first, the isolation feels heavy. Eventually, it becomes comforting. By the time this happened, I had already made it back to the United States. The trip was almost over. I only had about 2 days left before I would officially be done. I was in my home state, and that sense of familiarity made me feel relaxed in a way I hadn't felt for months. I wasn't on high alert anymore. After everything I'd experienced abroad, camping alone in the desert at home felt easy and safe. That night, I set up my tent in the Arizona desert. It was a simple setup, something I had done hundreds of times by then. I found a flat spot away from the road, pitched the tent, and then hung my food high up in a cactus to keep animals from getting to it. The desert was quiet, the air dry and cool. Everything felt calm. I crawled into my tent and lay down, exhausted but content. My body was tired in that deep, the satisfying way you get after months of constant movement. I remember thinking that I was almost done, that soon I would be sleeping in real beds again, and that this was probably one of my last nights completely alone. Just as I was starting to drift off, I heard something outside the tent. It sounded small, light, like a little animal moving through the brush. My first thought was a raccoon, or maybe a ringtail, something common in the desert. I wasn't alarmed. I had dealt with curious animals plenty of times on the trip. I heard it moving closer to the tent. Then it stopped. A moment passed. Then it came closer again. Then stopped. The pattern repeated, slow and cautious. It sounded like whatever it was kept creeping forward, then freezing, then creeping forward again. I stayed still, listening. I wasn't afraid yet. Mostly, I was curious. I wanted to see what kind of animal it was. I shifted slightly, trying to peek out of the tent. The sound stopped immediately. I waited. Nothing. I moved again, and whatever it was ran off. I could hear it retreating into the darkness. I sighed, a little annoyed. I wasn't trying to scare it away. I just wanted to see it. After a while, I settled back down, but not long after, the sound returned. The same slow approach. Closer. Stop. Closer. Stop. Every time I moved, it disappeared. It was like a game of patience, and whatever was outside seemed better at it than I was. Eventually, I decided to change tactics. I unzipped the tent flap and left it open. I sat there quietly with my headlamp off, holding it in my hand with my finger resting on the button. I aimed it toward the spot where I kept hearing the movement. I told myself I would wait until it came really close, then turn the light on quickly so I could finally see it. A few minutes passed. Then I heard it again. Soft footsteps in the dirt. Leaves and gravel shifting slightly. It was coming closer. I held my breath. Closer. Closer. My heart started beating a little faster, not out of fear yet, but anticipation. When it sounded like it was right there, I pressed the button. The headlamp snapped on. 2 eyes stared back at me from the darkness. They reflected the light brightly, frozen in place. Whatever it was didn't move. It just looked at me. I leaned forward slightly, trying to make out its shape, but all I could see were the eyes. Still, I wasn't scared. Animals freeze sometimes. This still felt manageable. We stared at each other for a few seconds. Then, without really thinking, I turned my head slightly and shined the light to the left. 2 more eyes. That made my stomach tighten. I swung the light to the right. 2 more eyes. My heart skipped. I started to feel a chill creep up my spine. This wasn't what I expected. 1 animal, fine. 2, maybe. But this? I moved the light farther to the right. 2 more eyes. I leaned out of the tent, my movement slow now, deliberate. I turned and shined the light behind me, over the top of the tent. 2 more eyes. Then 2 more. All around me, at different distances, were pairs of eyes reflecting back at me. They weren't rushing. They weren't making noise. They were just there, watching, surrounding the tent in a loose circle. That was the moment fear finally hit. My thoughts spiraled fast. What kind of animal does this? What animals hunt or move in groups like this in the Arizona desert? I tried to think logically, but my brain refused to settle. Coyotes crossed my mind, but they usually make noise. They don't just silently surround a tent and stare. The desert, which had felt calm and safe just minutes earlier, suddenly felt hostile and alive in a way I hadn't experienced before. I felt exposed, sitting there in my thin tent, with nothing but darkness and unknown animals all around me. I didn't wait to find out what would happen next. I grabbed my guitar. It was the first thing my hand landed on, and instinct took over. I strummed it as hard and as loudly as I could. The sound exploded into the quiet desert, sharp and chaotic. I kept strumming over and over, not stopping, not slowing down. I didn't look around anymore. I just played. My arms started to ache, but I didn't stop. Every time I thought about stopping, I imagined those eyes moving closer. I told myself that noise was my only defense, that as long as I kept making sound, they would stay back. Time stretched out. Minutes felt like hours. My fingers hurt. My heart wouldn't slow down. Slowly, as the night dragged on, the fear dulled into exhaustion. Eventually, I noticed the darkness starting to soften, the sky lightening just a little at the edges. When the sun finally began to rise, I stopped playing. I waited, listening. The desert was quiet again. I looked around carefully. There were no eyes anymore, no movement, no sound. Whatever had been there was gone. I packed up as quickly as I could once there was enough light to see clearly. I didn't linger. I didn't explore. I got on my bike and rode out, and my body still tense, my mind replaying the moment over and over. I still don't know what surrounded my tent that night. I've camped in remote places all over the world. I've heard animals outside my tent before. But nothing has ever made me feel that kind of sudden, overwhelming fear. To this day, when I think about that night in the Arizona desert, I still get goosebumps. Five years ago, I was sitting in bed one evening, doing something completely ordinary. I was reading, relaxed, not tired yet, just enjoying the quiet. The room was calm and familiar, the kind of calm you don't think twice about because it's part of your everyday life. Nothing felt strange. Nothing felt off. It was just another night at home. My bedroom door was open, and the hallway light was on. casting a soft glow across the floor and the wall. I remember being focused on the page in front of me, half aware of my surroundings in the way you are when you're comfortable and not expecting anything unusual to happen. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone walk past my bedroom door. It wasn't a quick flash or a shadow that could easily be explained away. It was a clear movement, the shape of a person passing by. I'm visible enough that my attention snapped away from my book immediately. I looked up, expecting to see my boyfriend walking down the hallway. But what I saw didn't make sense. The man who walked past my door was old, tall. His posture was slightly stooped, and his movement was slow and deliberate. He didn't glance into the room. He didn't acknowledge me at all. He simply walked by, disappearing out of view. For a moment, I just sat there, frozen, trying to understand what I had just seen. I called out to my boyfriend right away. He answered from the living room, sounding confused. When he came into the hallway, he told me he hadn't moved from the couch in hours. He hadn't gotten up. He hadn't walked past my room. He hadn't seen anyone. We checked the house together. No one else was there. At the time, I told myself it must have been my imagination. Maybe I was tired. Maybe my eyes had played tricks on me. Even though the image of the man was clear in my mind, I didn't want to believe anything else. I pushed the memory aside and tried to forget about it. About a month later, it happened again. This time it was worse. I woke up in the middle of the night for no clear reason. That alone wasn't unusual. Sometimes you just wake up. But the moment I opened my eyes, my stomach dropped. He was standing at the end of my bed. The same man. Old. Tall. Silent. He wasn't moving. He wasn't leaning or reaching. He was just there, standing still, facing me. The room was dim, lit only by the faint glow from outside, but I could see him clearly enough to recognize him as the same figure I had seen before. My heart started pounding. I blinked a few times, hard, deliberately, trying to force my vision to clear. He was still there. My mind raced, searching for explanations. Sleep paralysis crossed my mind, but I could move. I could breathe normally. I wasn't frozen. I wasn't dreaming. Slowly, with shaking hands, I reached for my bedside lamp and turned it on. The light filled the room instantly. He was gone. The space at the end of my bed was empty. Nothing out of place. Nothing disturbed. Just my bedroom, exactly as it had always been. I sat there for a long time afterward, heart racing, unable to go back to sleep. Again, I tried to explain it away. Night terrors, stress, my brain filling in gaps, anything that sounded reasonable. Still, the image of that man stayed with me. The way he stood, the feeling of being watched, the silence. Years passed. Nothing like that happened again for a long time, and eventually I convinced myself that whatever it was over. I moved on with my life. The memory faded into something I rarely thought about, something that felt distant enough to ignore. Then, last month, it happened again. This time I was staying with a friend on the other side of the country. Completely different house, completely different environment. No connection to my old home at all. I was sleeping in a guest room, unfamiliar but comfortable enough. The day had been normal. Nothing stressful, nothing emotional. In the middle of the night, I woke up. That same sudden awareness hit me, the feeling that something wasn't right. Before I could even fully open my eyes, my body tensed. He was there, standing at the foot of the bed. The same old, tall man. Seeing him again after all those years felt unreal, like time had folded in on itself. My chest tightened, and my mind went blank. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just stared, trying to understand how this could be happening again, in a place so far removed from the first 2 times. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared at me. Something about his presence felt heavy, like the air itself had thickened. I felt exposed and small, lying there while he stood above me. I was terrified, but at the same time, there was a strange sense of familiarity. I recognized him instantly, even though years had passed. Slowly, I laid my head back down on the pillow. I don't know why I did that. It was instinct, maybe denial, maybe fear. I closed my eyes for a moment, my heart pounding in my ears. I told myself to breathe. I told myself to be calm. Then I peeked back up. He was gone. The room was empty, quiet, normal. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I lay there replaying all 3 moments over and over in my head. The hallway, the foot of my bed, the guest room across the country, the same man, the same silence, the same disappearance. What unsettles me the most isn't just seeing him. It's the consistency. The fact that it's always the same figure, the same age, the same height, the same presence. No matter where I am, I don't know who he is, I don't know what he wants, I don't know if he's real, a hallucination, a recurring sleep-related phenomenon, or something else entirely. I just know that seeing him feels different than a dream. It feels grounded, real, and deeply unsettling. I still think about it, especially at night. Sometimes I wake up suddenly and expect to see him again. Sometimes I hesitate before turning on a light. And sometimes, when I'm staying somewhere unfamiliar, I can't help but glance toward the foot of the bed, just in case. I don't know if I'll ever see him again. But the fact that he came back after so many years, in a completely different place, makes me wonder if he ever really left at all,